This may come as a surprise to some people, being the huge fan of Persona 3 that I am, but despite the fact that FES was the game that got me into Megaton, I have not beaten it or the answer. The reason for this is that the version I played, the digital version on PS3, has a glitch where sometimes when you get to a save point, it won't load your saves properly. All you need to do to fix this is just back out and go back, but if you save it on this screen, not only will it not save, but if you saved in the same spot as your original save, it'll delete your file, which is exactly what happened to me. Of course, I wanted to finish the game, but I didn't want to risk this happening again, so I bought Portable, and I have never looked back. Not only does Portable not have that bug, but it also has a huge number of improvements and new features, like gameplay balance improvements, skill cards, and a playable female protagonist, just to name a few. But what it doesn't have is the epilogue that was added in FES, the answer where you play as Aegis. I don't know if this was a disk space issue or they just didn't think including it was worth the effort, but whatever the case, I've been putting off the answer for too long. And what a better way to finally play it than as a sequel to my most viewed video. Not only is this going to be my first time playing the answer, I'm going to be doing it as a challenge, where I am only allowed to use my starting Orpheus. The rules are pretty much the same as that video. I always have to have my starting persona equipped, but I am still allowed to fuse personas for things like heart items and skill cards. That would be if there were any skill cards in this game, but I'll elaborate more on why this challenge will be so difficult as I play. I also normally make it a rule that I have to play on the highest difficulty, but the answer is always on hard by default, so I don't have to worry about anything there. But that's enough rules. Let's get into the video. Can you beat Persona 3 FES The Answer with only Orpheus? But first, a word from our sponsor. The internet is becoming an increasingly dangerous place for anyone that uses it. Your data could be being monitored by your government, big corporations, or cybercriminals as we speak, which is why you need a VPN, specifically NordVPN. NordVPN is one of the most respected and well-known providers of VPN services in the industry, available for iOS, macOS, Windows, Linux, and Android OS. Both me and my family have been using the service for more than a year, and that service has been stellar, and I have no plans to switch anytime soon. NordVPN has over 5,400 servers in 60 countries. With these servers, you get protection from DDoS attacks, protection from malware-infested websites, and access to websites and videos that may not be available in your region. And, more recently, NordVPN has added a new service called Threat Protection, which helps you identify malware-infected files, warns you before accessing malicious websites, and blocks potentially dangerous advertisements. Best of all, this works even when you're not connected to a VPN server. And I almost forgot to mention, if you go to the link down below in the description, nordvpn.com/Nyarly, you'll get an additional month for free with the purchase of a 2-year plan. I cannot recommend it enough, especially for the price you're getting it at. I want to give a big thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and now that that's out of the way, let's get back to the video. The game starts not long after the final events of Persona 3, with everyone spending their last day at the dorm before it shuts down, while still mourning over Dorkun. Aegis is also apparently withdrawing from school so that she can return to the lab. Later that night, at midnight, the dark hour doesn't start, but time does rewind back to the beginning of the same day, though everyone assumes this is just caused by a lack of sleep and goes to bed. Aegis, though, is apparently struggling with insomnia. Yeah, how does a robot struggle with insomnia? Well, whatever. But the dorm apparently has doors to a secret basement that suddenly open up, and out of it comes a mysterious black robot thing claiming to be Aegis' sister. And because she beat up our friends, we now have to fight her. Now, with this being the first battle of the game, you can probably already guess how it's supposed to go. There is one problem, however. Aegis is still using Athena, and I have no way to change personas at the moment. To be honest, I'd have been okay doing a run with Athena only, but you'll see why I can't do that in just a minute. For now, all I can do is win just using my normal attack, because by doing this, I'm technically not summoning Orpheus, but Athena's stats still apply. Although I don't know how different they are because I have no way to check. Whether you consider this a necessary alteration of the rules or not a problem at all, I'll let you decide. But either way, I don't have Orpheus, but that's about to change after I beat her, which I do.
I won't miss! No!
During that fight, Aegis somehow gained all of Makoto's powers, and both of us get knocked out. When we wake up, we learn that this robot claiming to be Aegis' sister is named Metis, and she explains that we're stuck in a time loop caused by the abyss of time directly below the dorm, and we need to investigate it to discover the cause, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing throughout this game. Now, unlike the journey where Orpheus started out at level 1, here he and all our other allies start at level 25. This Orpheus also has different skills, those being Agi, Dia, Tarunda, Assault Dive, Agilao, and Swift Strike. The latter three he learns later on. So I at least have a little more to work with here than if I were playing the journey. But like I said earlier, without skill cards, once I get these skills, that's about it. The only way Orpheus can learn new skills is through mutation, which, if it happens, the skill that changes and the one it changes into are completely random, and the chances of this happening are pretty slim. I also don't have access to the entire party either at the start of the game, despite them all still being here. So out of the ones I have, I go with Akihiko, Yukari, and Metis, so that I have a good healer and decent elemental coverage. Once we head into the Abyss, we see a figure that looks a lot like Makoto go into one of the doors, so we go after him. Now, gameplay-wise, the answer is pretty much just an extension of the base game. The only major difference is that there's no calendar or social link system, and you now play as Aegis, and you also have the new character, Metis. Although, statistically, she actually seems to have a lot in common with Shinjiro, but whatever. The combat is the same, and you still go through the same series of randomly generated floors. Now, if you've only played Portable, you may be wondering what's different in this version. I already mentioned that there aren't any skill cards, but you also can't manually control your party members. Yeah, what moves they do is completely up to the AI. It works well for the most part, especially when you alter their commands using the tactics menu, but they still tend to do stupid things, especially if they have ailment attacks, like Mitsuru spamming Marin Karin, which has been a meme for more than a decade. In any normal playthrough, you're probably going to be using the protagonist to carry the party through the game anyway, but with Orpheus's limited moveset, I'm going to have to rely on my allies a lot more, and that's pretty scary considering that I can't control them. There are also changes to the way getting knocked down works. In Portable, characters that are knocked down can attack the same turn they get back up, and if a character gets hit when they're knocked down, they'll become dizzy and will have to wait a turn before they can attack again. Here, they can't attack the turn they get up, and if they're hit while down, they'll automatically get back up. This has the potential to be both a blessing and a curse, but considering that the AI can and will attack enemies while they're still down, I think it's more curse than blessing. The first area of the Abyss is pretty easy. On Orpheus' first level up, he gets a skill change, surprisingly. I'm a bit reluctant to do this, but unless it's an absolutely important skill, I really can't afford to miss the chance at him learning a strong skill. So I let it happen, and Dia turns into Dodge Wind, which isn't really good, but not completely useless either. Anyway, the first boss I have to fight is a Hulk Hogan and 3 small blobs. The blobs are weak to fire, which is great since Orpheus has Agi, but they also have dodge fire, which isn't great, and you're gonna see that that's a reoccurring theme in this game for bosses to dodge or evade the elements they're weak against. Another common thing you'll see with the bosses is that your allies will usually hit something that they resist or block at least once. Even if it's not your first attempt and you know what moves to and not to use, your allies don't, so they're going to do that thing where they test every element to see what does and doesn't work, so I recommend just taking the first couple turns to set up if you can. Like I said, the blobs are weak against fire, and Mr. Hogan is weak against wind. Now, on the first turn, Metis uses Marin Karin, which actually hits the boss, surprisingly, and it doesn't help that the blobs barely have any HP, but they do reflect strike, so every time Mr. Hogan attacks one of them, he actually damages himself. Overall, this boss is painfully easy. I did get lucky, but I don't think I'd have had much of a problem either way. This boss goes down after about 5 minutes thanks to an all-out attack. We go through the next area and get to what looks like Tick-Tock Clock from Super Mario 64, and the door takes us to Polonium Mall, and apparently it's last year here. Regardless of the reason, we now have access to the shops. We can't increase Orpheus' stats through the arcade machines, but we can buy skill point cards at the antique shop. You know those rocks that enemies sometimes drop? Yeah, save those up. Anyway, I don't have a lot of money, so I just head back and go through the next door. And now I have the option to use Junpei and Koromaru, but I think I'm still okay with the team that I've been using. Now, this is when you're probably starting to notice that Orpheus is lagging behind Aegis in leveling a little bit. This is normal for these starting Persona-only challenges, so it's best to counteract this by taking the wand cards whenever you see them. Not only because they increase your experience, but they also have the chance to increase your Persona stats, although this is rare. One thing that I didn't notice until now, though, is that items you pick up in the dungeon have their own effects, and these effects are random. They include things like increasing some of your stats, inflicting ailments, or increasing damage against certain arcanas. These effects are completely random, and even 2 of the same equipment can have a different effect, so don't write off anything you may already have that you find in a chest or get from a sword card. Oh, and one last thing to mention is that these random battles, while easy, will drain your SP faster than a new 5-star waifu will drain a gacha player's bank account. So rather than attempting to fight the bosses at low SP, in most cases, I'm just going to be going back to the entrance to heal up, and then speeding through the area while avoiding the enemies to get to the boss. It's annoying, but in my opinion, it's better than scraping by the boss with no SP. Plus, it's a good chance to stock up on items before the boss, which I do, including buying some new sword cards to increase Orpheus' strength, something I'm definitely going to be doing until he reaches 99 with it. Now, the next boss is one of those hanging things, and this time there's only one. It specializes in ice attacks, which Akihiko is weak to, but he's holding the ice charm, making him harder to hit. This boss also has no weakness, but early on, Akihiko gets a lucky critical hit, which knocks it down, and an all-out attack takes away almost half of its health. Aegis later lands another critical hit with Assault Dive, and an all-out attack is almost enough to kill it, but it just barely survives and summons a Dancer as a last resort. But thankfully, it's pretty weak, and thanks to a critical hit from Metis, we are able to take it down with an all-out attack and finish the match.
All right, sister. Let's get him. Keep your filthy hands off my sister.
I get to the next clock area with a door, and this time we see the first of many character flashbacks. Some might consider this unnecessary because most of the stuff was already explained in the base game, but I think it provides some interesting insight into the characters. Anyway, this one is Ken's, who says a monster killed his mom, but the police don't believe him. After this, Mitsuru becomes available to join, but again, I think I'm still good with my current party. The next area is Kaina. It's pretty much the same deal as the last area. The enemies still have weaknesses that can easily be exploited, and our all-out attacks get stronger the more we level up. And as with the last area, and for pretty much the rest of the game really, I make sure to challenge as many enemies as I can and grab the wand card at every opportunity I get. Now, the first boss of this section is one of those walking castle things and 2 golden lions. The lions specialize in physical attacks, while the castle specializes in healing, evasion buffing, and electric attacks. You'd think that this would be difficult, considering that both Aegis and Yukari are weak to electricity, but this surprisingly isn't the case. For one thing, the castle's HP count is absolutely pathetic for a boss, even this early in the game, and despite it using Masuku Kaja on the first turn, almost all my party's attacks hit it. Another thing that helps is that Metis has Dekaja, which cancels out the buffs, but of course that doesn't stop it from reapplying the buff. But every turn it does this is a turn it doesn't attack. During this battle, I don't mess with the tactics menu, and with Aegis, I alternate between healing with items and attacking with Swift Strike, while Akihiko heals and uses Mazionga. Yukari heals and attacks with her bow, and Metis alternates between Dekaja and whatever physical attack she feels like using. Neither the castle or the lions are particularly strong either. The main reason this battle takes so long is because later on in the game, the castle seems to have an annoyingly high evasion rate, even when Tsukukaja isn't active, and I get tons of consecutive misses when it starts to get low on health. But this doesn't stop me from winning though, and about 7 minutes in, I take out the castle. The lions don't have any of the same support abilities as the castle, so taking them out is simple. It takes about another minute or so before Metis figures out that they're weak to ice, but once she does, we can hit them with an all-out attack, which takes off about a third of their health each. Once it's Metis' turn again, she knocks them down again, and I take one of them out. Or, well, almost do, but it dodges almost all of my attacks, but once that one is down, Metis knocks the last one down, and we finish it off with a third all-out attack. Overall, I'd say this boss is pretty easy.
Persona! All right, sister. Let's get him. Attack! Keep your filthy hands off.
The same, however, cannot be said of the next one. Here, I have to fight the Harem Dancer and 2 more blobs with red masks. So, what makes this boss so difficult? Well, all 3 of these bosses have a wide variety of ailment-inducing moves. The Merciless Mayas have Eerie Sound, which inflicts distress, and Virus Breath, which not only has a chance to poison, but always takes away a quarter of everyone's HP. The Harem Dancer has both Marin Karin and Poison Mist, and I don't think I need to explain why Charm is one of, if not the worst ailments in the game. And also, according to the Megaton Wiki, this thing also has Charm Boost, which makes it even more likely to hit. This battle gets off to a terrible start. One of them distresses Yukari and Akihiko, which makes them more vulnerable to critical hits, and a few turns in, a heat wave kills them both. At that point, I just say screw it and reset the game. For the next attempt, the Harem Dancer leads off with Poison Mist, which isn't ideal, but it's better to be inflicted with poison than distress. But I have to wonder how Aegis and Metis can be poisoned if they're robots. Well, thankfully, this attempt goes much better than the last one. Akihiko once again mostly goes for Diorama and Mazionga, Yukari with Meteorama and Garula, and Metis with Marin Karin, before she figures out that the Mayas are weak against wind, and after that, she starts going for Garula. With Aegis, I don't have much in the way of useful skills at this point in the game, so with her, I mostly just use her normal attack. In this attempt, the Mayas aren't actually that much of a problem because despite the fact that they have dodge wind, they don't dodge very often, and with Metis constantly knocking them down, they can't attack. The Mayas also have much less HP than the Dancer, so even though I'm not really targeting any of them in particular, they do go down pretty quickly. Once both the Mayas have been taken out, it's pretty easy. The Harem Dancer pretty much does nothing but spam Heat Wave while using Marin Karin every now and then. While the Heat Wave isn't doing enough to pose much of a threat, especially with Yukari's healing, I do weaken its attack with Darunda just to be safe. My team also gets a little low on HP near the end, and I decide to use a bead chain for good measures. And after that, the Harem Dancer goes down.
I need your help! No shadows detected. The battle's over.
A few floors later, we get to another door that also contains a flashback. This time, it's a slightly younger Akihiko, who turns down a scholarship for another school because their team lost. Mitsuru sees Akihiko's wish to face greater challenges, and invites him to join SEAS. And Metis is also starting to become more curious about human life through seeing these flashbacks. But now that that's out of the way, we head on over to the next area, Antonora. And again, not much is different here. I'm still using the same team I have been, and the enemies all have exploitable weaknesses that I can use to take them down easily. Anyway, the first boss here is a Judgment Sword, an Ice Raven, and a Brave Wheel. Given that there are 3 different bosses here, all of which specialize in a different element, together they have a lot of versatility, and they are also quite strong. The Ice Raven likes to go for Mabufula, while the Sword goes for Mazionga, and the Wheel goes for Miragion. Thankfully, nobody on my team is weak to fire, but the Raven is kind of a big problem for Akihiko, and the Sword is for Aegis and Yukari. Remember what I said in the beginning about how being knocked down in this game can be both a blessing and a curse? Well, this is clearly a case where it does more harm than good, because I constantly have to get up after being knocked down, and I can't attack when this happens. While the enemies also have weaknesses I can exploit, I have to rely on the AI to go for them, and even if they do, they also have dodge and evade skills for them. Oh, and did I mention that the bird also has Tentarafu? Yeah, this fight doesn't go well, and it takes me several attempts. After about 4 or 5 failed attempts, I go back to the shop to stock up on items and do some more grinding on the way back up. During this time, Fuka learns her Oracle skill, which has the ability to heal both my team's HP and SP, and could potentially save me a second trip through the floor before the boss. Once I decide I've done enough, I attempt the boss again, and this time I make use of the tactics menu and assign my allies to whichever of the enemies their persona counters. For Aegis, I decide to focus on the Ice Raven since it's not only weak to fire, but it also has the most dangerous moveset. This is one of those battles where it starts to get easier once you take out one of the enemies. The enemies also have Masukunda, but thankfully I have some agility sutras which I got from the antique shop. Overall, the AI doesn't seem as smart this time around. It doesn't go for my weaknesses as often, and even when it does, I just seem to get luckier with hits and dodges. The first enemy to go down is the sword, which is done thanks to Metis spamming it with Garula. And then it's not long after when I take out the Ice Raven. The last one standing is the wheel, which, as you'd expect, is weak to ice. I assign Metis to take it out via the tactics menu, and when she does knock it down, an all-out attack is almost enough to take it out, but Aegis is able to take it out with a normal attack.
All right, sister. Let's get him. Everybody attack! Take this! The enemy is getting stronger, too.
Now, in this next area, the enemies are starting to get a little tougher, but they're also providing a lot of EXP, so I think this is a great opportunity to grind if you're underleveled. During one of Orpheus' level ups, he gets his second mutation, and this time it's Aki Lao that wants to mutate. Unfortunately, that is kind of an important skill at the moment, so I decide not to let it go through, but I do find the very important Spirit Bracers, which give the holder Endure. An absolute must for Aegis, since if she dies, it's game over. Anyway, the next boss battle is another one against 3 different enemies with different stats and weaknesses. There's the Primitive Idol, which focuses on magic attacks and is weak to electricity, the Shouting Tiara, which focuses on healing and support, and the Wrathful Book, which just applies buffs. It may sound easier than the last one on paper since there's really only one attacker, but believe me, these buffs make a world of differences and ones that are not in my favor. The sutras are pretty much a necessity for this fight to counter the debuffs. Things actually go pretty well in the beginning, and I'm able to get the book down to very low HP thanks to a few lucky shocks and critical hits, but things do start turning against me. For one thing, Akihiko gets hit with rage and he knocks himself out after the enemy uses Tetracard. I do take the book out, and I could revive Akihiko, but considering that he's weak to ice and that's exactly what the boss specializes in, I think it's best if I don't. There's also a point in the battle where my party gets dangerously low on HP, so I have to use another one of my bead chains, but after this, Metis takes out the Tiara. Now all that's left is the Idol. This thing pretty much spends the rest of the fight spamming ice moves, but without any of its minions to support it, it's only a few turns before I take it out.
I won't miss! All enemies defeated.
Not much is different in the next area of this dungeon, but Orpheus does get another mutation during one of his level ups, and since it's Assault Dive, which isn't as important as Agilao, I decide to let it happen and it turns into Dodge Slash, which isn't great, but I'm not too upset about it either, though I'd prefer some more elemental coverage. We make it to the end, and this time we get a flashback from Junpei, who goes to the mall to get away from his drinking family and meets Koromaru. Metis remarks that the doors are only there for people that still have roles to play, and neither Aegis nor her have one because we have already delivered on our purposes. Now we get to Patallmia, and this is where things are starting to get hard. The enemies are no problem, but the bosses, hoo boy. The first boss battle is against a Wondrous Magus, a Crying Table, and a Cowardly Maya. On its first turn, the table goes for Evil Smile, which thankfully misses everyone except Yukari, and then the Maya follows it up with a Ghastly Wail, which, if you didn't know, automatically kills anyone inflicted with fear. So yeah, my best healer is dead at the start of the match. And because this is one of those bosses where the enemies are actually working together for a strategy, I'm going to have to prioritize targets to take them out as fast as possible. I decide to focus on the Maya first to protect me from the Ghastly Wail. I assign both Metis and Akihiko to the Maya as a target, revive Yukari, But then I get hit with Tentarafu, and Akihiko gets taken out with a twin shot and a Bufula. This pretty much sums up the first half of this battle. It's just me struggling to get back up on my feet while getting constantly knocked down by the enemy. I use a magic mirror in an attempt to protect myself for at least one turn, and it helps, but this itself isn't enough. The table then uses Spirit Drain on Yukari, which, when I use it, it always steals a fixed 20 SP, but in this case, it steals 107 SP from her. At this point, I debated resetting the game, but I decided to stick with it. Shortly after this, Aigis gets hit with an Evil Smile, followed by a Ghastly Wail, but thankfully she survives thanks to the Spirit Bracers I found a little while ago, and I'm able to take out the Maya not long after that. I then revive Akihiko and decide to focus my attention on the Magus. It does manage to take out Metis and Yukari, but thankfully Aigis and Akihiko get lucky and dodge the enemy's attacks, and Akihiko manages to take it out a few turns later. Only thing left now is the table, which, while strong, doesn't have any attacks that anyone on my team is weak to. You'd think this would be easy, but unfortunately for a table, this thing is surprisingly agile, with the majority of my attacks missing, and after getting pummeled, I have to resort to using a bead chain again. To make matters worse, I try to go for Fuka's Oracle, but it fails and everyone gets reduced to 1 HP. Thankfully, Aigis doesn't get attacked after this, but it forces me to use another bead chain. After this, though, the table is very low on HP, and a few turns later, it goes down.
That would do it. Take this! I made up my mind. I won't.
This next area looks like the inside of a really fancy church, and the enemies here are a lot stronger this time around. Boss, on the other hand, not so much. It may look strong, but there's only one, which means a single Tarunda is enough to cripple its entire strategy. With this, its moves aren't doing anywhere near enough to cause a problem for the party, and it doesn't have any moves that the party is weak to either. In the tactics menu, I assign both Akihiko and Metis to it as a target, while having Yukari set to healing. This whole battle is pretty much just spamming my normal attack with Aigis, Akihiko spamming Zeodyne, Yukari using Meteorama, and Metis using whatever attack she feels like. The enemy alternates between Akasha Arts, Vicious Strike, and Megarudyne, and in a last-ditch effort toward the end, it goes for Power Charge, but I counter this by setting up an attack mirror, and in the final turn, the Neo Minotaur takes itself out with a reflected Vicious Strike.
Keep your filthy hands off my sister!
So that's it for the bosses of this area. At the giant door in the end, this time we get a flashback from Mitsuru, who, as a child, awakened her persona after a shadow threatened her dad. Now that I'm done with that area, I do the usual healing and resupplying, but I also start messing around with fusion in the Velvet Room, because now I'm high enough level that I have access to some personas with valuable heart items, specifically the ones that void certain elements. Yeah, there may not be skill cards in this version of the game, but there are still heart items. Remember in my original video when I did a whole bunch of grinding for things like the lightning gloves and the frozen stone? Well, I'm gonna be doing the same here. Since I can't use these personas, I need to make sure to fuse them with the growth skills, and because there are no social links in the answer, I already have access to these ultimate personas. The first and most important one that I need is the lightning gloves, which I get from Thor, so I start by fusing a Thor with growth 3. Anyway, the next area is Judeka, and here the first boss is a spastic turret and 2 slaughter drives. As expected of enemies of this type, the 2 drives like to use physical attacks, while the tank has a few physical and fire attacks. And this battle is actually surprisingly easy. All 3 of these enemies have easily exploitable weaknesses, and they're not very strong, nor do they have any attacks that my party is weak against. Both of the drives are weak to electricity, and the tank is weak to ice. In the tactics menu, I assign Akihiko to the drives while assigning Metis to the tank. What I keep hoping will happen is that Akihiko will be able to knock down the drives with Mazionga, while Metis knocks down the tank with Bufudyne, allowing me to do an all-out attack. But this is easier said than done, mainly because the enemies, like most bosses in this game, all evade their weaknesses. About halfway in, I take out one of the drives, but after that, I just say screw it and go all out on the tank, because the tank is actually able to summon more drives if you take them out. I get the second drive down to about a fifth of its HP, and when this happens, it goes for last resort, which does a decent amount of damage to the party, but it also hits the tank, and to that, it does about 1,000 damage. After that, with the tank being the only one left, Metis knocks it down with Bufudyne, and I hit it with an all-out attack, which does about 500 damage. So at this point, it's low, and I try to see if I can take it out before it summons another drive with a Pafula Stone, but it evades and summons another drive. But I'm at least able to take it out in a few more turns, and not long after this, the drive goes for last resort, but doesn't take out my party, so I win the battle.
Keep your filthy hands off my sister!
On the way to the next boss, I get Thor's heart item, the lightning gloves, and give them to Yukari. The next boss here is a conceited Maya, a giant one of the blob enemies, and it's glowing pink. Here, I don't heal my SP before going in, but I do this in hopes that I'll be able to fully heal with Oracle. So I go for this, and it doesn't heal my HP, but it does heal my SP, and that's really all I need. But anyway, this boss isn't particularly strong. It only has weak magic attacks and not a lot of magic power to back it up. But it does have all the single and multi-target weak magic attacks, as well as multi-targeting buff and debuff skills. That still doesn't sound too bad until it summons 2 Jotuns of Blood, and these things have all the heavy magic attacks, along with a good amount of magic power. They also have Mudun, which is horrible if they decide to use it against Aegis, but thankfully they don't seem to go for this that often, and when they do, I get pretty lucky with it, and it misses. From this point, it's pretty much just the Jotun spamming Bufudine, usually on Akihiko, but Akihiko has the accessory that helps him dodge ice, so they don't hit him super often. The Maya, on the other hand, keeps spamming buffs and debuffs, so it's really hard to decide which of these enemies needs to be taken out first. But by this point, the Maya has already lost a good chunk of its HP, so I decide to keep focusing on that, and it's not too long before I take it out, even with all the debuffs. The Jotuns of Blood, on the other hand, like I said before, have a decent amount of magic attack, but an absolutely pathetic amount of HP. I should also mention that these things null all magic in the game, so I set Aki and Metis' tactics to conserve SP, and we just spend the rest of the battle beating the crap out of these things. It's only a few turns before I take out the first one, and after that, I'm easily able to take out the other with a series of rush attacks.
Wow, you're all so powerful! All enemies defeated.
Once that battle is over, I go back to the Velvet Room to fuse not 1, but 2 personas. The first being Surt for his blazing flame in case I decide to use Mitsuru later, and another Thor. That way I have a second pair of lightning gloves for Aegis in case I need them, and getting these doesn't take long at all. There's also the Frozen Stone, which I get from Gabriel, but I'm not high enough level to fuse her yet. Anyway, the next flashback door thing shows us Yukari, where she's about to start high school, and she gets a letter from her dad that was kept in a time capsule for 10 years. And by watching this, Yukari figures out that this is what made everyone awaken to the personas. It also becomes apparent that we're getting close to the end. Now, the next area is available, but I don't power through it immediately. I decide to do a bit more grinding, not only for getting the Blazing Flame, but also so that I can level up some of the characters that have been getting left behind. Yeah, unfortunately in this game, party members don't level up when you're not using them like they do in P5. It's quite difficult and kind of frustrating, but oddly rewarding. I don't know why, but it just feels oddly satisfying being able to beat enemies with party members that are half the enemy's level, even if it does result in dying a lot. Although, when I think about it, Junpei and Ken aren't really that useful compared to the others, so after a little while, I instead decide to focus on just grinding Mitsuru. During this time, Orpheus gets another skill mutation, and this time Dodge Slash mutates into Fatal End, which isn't amazing, but it now means I have a Slash skill on Orpheus. And after this, I realize that I'm now high enough level to fuse Gabriel, meaning I'll soon have the Frozen Stone and a weakness-free team. But anyway, the next area I have to go through is the Imperian, not to be confused with the Imperian Ascent from Strange Journey Redux. The enemies here are a lot tougher than in previous areas, and I even die a couple of times while grinding, but the boss is on a whole nother level. It's against another hanging Cyclops thing and 2 Seekers, you know, those eyeball things that turn into a face during attacks. Now, the Cyclops isn't too big of a threat, he just has a whole bunch of physical attacks along with high counter and all the evade physical skills. The Seekers, however, have fear and panic skills, fire and wind skills, and Hama-on and Mudun, plus the booster skills. I think you can probably tell where this is going. This isn't a case where they just have them but prefer going for other skills. The AI is either a hardcore Yukari or Mitsuru fan, or it just knows my weakness and is purposefully targeting Aegis because of it. Seriously, these things spam Mudun against Aegis almost every turn they get. I try going to the antique shop to buy as many homunculi as I can, but even this isn't enough to protect me from these things. I try knocking them down with Agilao, but this only works so well because they're weak against fire, but as you'd expect, they also have evade fire. The Cyclops is also making things difficult because it actually hits quite hard. After about 5 or 6 tries, it becomes apparent that this battle is just not feasible under these conditions. What I need is the Ring of Darkness, which is Thanatos' heart item. Thankfully, there are no ridiculous special fusions in the answer, and Thanatos can easily be fused pretty normally. Although, for some reason, the first time I fused him, he didn't come with a heart item, something I didn't actually notice until I grinded him to learn all his skills. So I gotta do it again. Yep, that's what dyslexia will do to you. But at least while grinding, I got some more onyxes. In fact, I actually got enough to buy enough cards to get Orpheus to 99 strength at level 71. So I equip the ring and challenge the boss again, and it is a night and day differences, but I still wouldn't say it's easy. I was kinda hoping that the Seekers would still think Aegis was weak to darkness and hit her with Mudun in spite of the ring, but that turns out not to be the case, and they instead seem to favor going for Miragidyne and Magarudyne, while the Cyclops favors going for God Hand and Poison Arrow. I also used some agility sutras throughout the battle in hopes that Akihiko will have an easier time hitting them, but it doesn't seem to make much of a difference either way. I also swapped Mitsuru with Yukari because Yukari has better healing spells. One thing that happens early on in this battle is Aegis getting poisoned from a poison arrow, which, you know, like I said before, doesn't make sense because she's a robot, and I also don't have any more disc poison, so there's nothing I can do about it. It's not unmanageable, just annoying, and I have to be extra careful with Aegis because without the Spirit Racers, if she dies once, it's game over. About halfway into the fight, the Cyclops goes for power charge, so I set up an attack mirror anticipating a multi-target attack, and that's exactly what happens. The attack is reflected, and the boss loses almost all of its HP. The next turn, I finish him off, and the remaining enemies are a complete joke. Aegis knocks them both down with Agilao, and we finish them off with a single all-out attack.
Keep it up! All right, sister, let's get him! Attack! Don't give up!
Shortly after the battle, Orpheus reaches level 72, and gets the last mutation of the run. Once again, Agilao is trying to mutate, and at this point in the game, it's not really useful for anything other than hitting a weakness, which I could still do with Agi, so I let it mutate, and it turns into Maracunda, which is, in all honesty, pretty good. Now the next and final normal boss of the Abyss is 3 of the Samurai Shadows, the Tenjin Musha, Kaiden Musha, and Onin Musha. Despite these enemies looking nearly identical, they're actually very different in terms of stats and skills. The black and red one likes to go for physical skills, while the white one provides support through moves like Revolution and Healing, and the other one uses whatever moves like Life Drain. For this battle, I decided to bring along Mitsuru instead of Metis, but this battle is easy either way. Why? Well, for one thing, none of these enemies have a particularly high amount of HP. Their attack patterns are predictable, and worst of all, Revolution affects all combatants, not just the user's party, and with the increased luck Orpheus has from all those guards, Aegis has an especially high critical rate. Plus, with there being 3 enemies, this is a perfect opportunity for me to get some use out of Orpheus' new skill, Maracunda. Given how these bosses specialize in physical attacks, I start setting up attack mirrors, and one of them damages itself by trying to attack Yukari. After that, I'm easily able to finish it off with 2 normal attacks. The next one tries to go for Tempest Slash on Akihiko, but just like with Yukari, it gets reflected, and after that, they set up a Tetrakarn of their own, but I get around this by just using magic. Then they go for Makarakarn, so I just use physical attacks, and it's not long before I'm able to take out the white one. The last one is a little trickier since it has high counter, which in this game actually has a 50% chance to reflect any physical attack, but that doesn't stop my party from pummeling it with magic and finishing it off with a normal attack.
You won't escape! All enemies defeated.
There aren't a lot of floors left now, and we get to what we think is the bottom of the Abyss of Time. Fuka tells us that the place was created as a byproduct of Tartarus. Once we open the door, we see an image of Aigis in a black room chasing Dorkun. These are the dreams that Aigis has been having, and it's apparently when she awakened to her powers. Not only that, but it turns out that the reason the Abyss of Time is still here and crawling with shadows is because of our own regrets, and the embodiment of all that is an even more emo version of Makoto Yuki, and we now have to fight him as a boss. Now, despite what the music might lead you to believe, you are not going to be able to beat this boss in just 1 or 2 hits and be done with it. This boss is, I wouldn't say hard, but not really easy either. For one thing, he has a ton of HP, but he also has the ability to switch personas, each of which are the personas used by your party, and he does this every 2 or 3 turns. The first one he starts with is Athena, and pretty much uses nothing but God's Hand. I make sure to lower his attack on the first turn with Darunda, and later reduce his defense with Marakunda. The next one he switches to is Caesar, who uses electric attacks, but thanks to my equipment, that's nulled by everyone except for Mitsuru. Now, one thing to note about this boss is that, while this boss technically has no weakness, it does have multipliers that increase incoming damage, and these are always 50%, and they're always the same as the weakness of the character's persona he's using. At this point, you should probably already know what these weaknesses are, but one thing I find kinda weird is that the characters acknowledge that he's using their personas when he changes to them, but the AI doesn't reflect this, so your allies will sometimes hit his resistances, even though they should already know that those attacks won't work. Though I could also say the same about him, as he often uses attacks on my allies that they null, even without the equipment. Regardless of the case, this fight isn't too hard. I bring Mitsuru, Yukari, and Akihiko along for this fight. In retrospect, it probably would have been a good idea to bring Metis along since he can't copy her persona, but it's still not difficult either way. Changing personas aside, I pretty much just handle this fight the same way I'd handle any other fight. Just support and attack with Aigis while letting my allies do the same. Mitsuru does go down once during the fight, but at this point he has almost no HP, so I decide to just keep on fighting, and without too much trouble, Shadow Makoto goes down. And once the fight is over, we're rewarded with this really weird but also cool FMV cutscene. After that, Metis explains that personas are actually just shadows that are born from our suppressed thoughts. Persona users just have the ability to tame theirs. This was actually made pretty obvious in Persona 4, but considering that this game came out earlier, this must have been a pretty shocking thing to hear for first-time players of the game. She also explains that we became trapped in this time loop because of our desire to see time stop moving forward, because of our regret of losing Makoto. We then notice that we all have keys, which are apparently the keys we need to get out, but we can actually use them on one of 2 doors. If we go out the entrance, we'll be back in the present, but if we use it on the door to Makoto's room, we'll go back to the past. Oh yeah, and once we go back to the dorm, we notice cracks in the floor, meaning we don't have a long time to decide, and apparently the team doesn't agree on what we should do. Specifically, Yukari thinks we should go back to the past so that we can save Makoto. Here's a not-so-fun fact. One of the reasons so many older fans of the series don't like Yukari is apparently for this reason. Supposedly, when FES came out and people played The Answer for the first time, Yukari's popularity and character pools plummeted. I say supposedly because I can't say for sure, I'm just going by what other people have told me, but either way, I don't necessarily agree. I mean, considering what Yukari has been through, I think a lot of people would have done the same if they were in her shoes. But the point is, this causes everyone to split into different factions. I honestly think this is a pretty cool idea, even if it's only brief. Seeing characters split up and fight over different ideologies is something the Persona series doesn't do that often. It's like something from a mainline game. But anyway, everyone decides to fight and wagers their keys. Whoever wins gets to decide which door to open. Aigis, Metis, and I guess Fuka team up, Ken and Akihiko team up, Junpei and Koromaru team up, and Mitsuru and Yukari team up. These next 3 boss battles are fought as a series of 2v2s. The first battle puts us up against Akihiko and Ken. Now, because both these characters specialize in electric attacks, this fight would have been a nightmare normally, but thankfully the lightning gloves make it much easier. That still does not mean it's easy though. For one thing, Aigis and Metis have nothing in the way of healing skills, so I have to rely exclusively on items. Now, during this fight, Akihiko seems to be the one causing the most trouble, so I decide to focus on him first. A few turns in, Ken goes for Rebellion, which, like I mentioned earlier, works on everyone, not just his team, and he also heals Akihiko. I'm not sure if this is scripted or not, but he doesn't go for it again, thankfully. There's really not a lot of strategy involved in this or any of these battles, it's just an exchange of attacks and healing until they both go down. I'm able to get a lucky critical hit on Akihiko with the help of Revolution and finish him off. And then I start to concentrate on Ken, who can't do much, and with it being 2 against 1, it's not long before he goes down.
No!
Oh, and their punishment for losing? They get turned into fire. At least until the tournament is over, that is. Anyway, up next, our opponents are Junpei and Koromaru. They seem to have the same beliefs as Akihiko and Ken, so I'm not really sure why they didn't side with them. But again, I doubt I'd have been able to beat all 4 of them together, so I really shouldn't complain. What I should complain about, though, is the fact that this game is making me beat up a dog. What the Atlus? Not only do you have to fight him, but he whimpers when you hit him. This is making me uncomfortable. I also forgot that Koromaru specializes in dark moves and didn't equip my Ring of Darkness, but thankfully he doesn't have Mudo boost like those Seekers from earlier did and misses the majority of the time. Unfortunately, I can't really afford to let him keep going for it, so I have to prioritize him as a target. Right before running out of HP, he uses Mamudun, which hits Aigis, but thankfully I still have plenty of Homunculi, and Metis is able to finish him off with a Poison Arrow. Now to focus on Junpei. Junpei actually hits a lot harder than I expected, and after Koromaru gets taken out, his Vorpal Blade does enough damage to take out Metis at 3/4 of her HP. He then goes for Power Charge and uses Vorpal Blade again the next turn, and it does a metric ton of damage. Aigis survives with just 2 HP. Oh, and he also has High Counter, which makes Metis knock herself out with an attack. After I bring her back, he goes for Power Charge again, so I use an Attack Mirror and I reflect his Vorpal Blade back at him, but it doesn't do anywhere near as much as I would have liked. And this is pretty much how the rest of the battle goes. Junpei just spams Vorpal Blade while occasionally using Power Charge while Metis attacks and Aigis debuffs and heals with items. Before too long, I am able to take Junpei out though.
Persona!
After that, Aigis refuses to continue fighting, but Metis changes her mind by telling her that the power Aigis inherited will come at the cost of her death, and she wants to sacrifice herself to save her. And Aigis realizes that we have to go through with this if we want to save everyone. So our next and final opponents are Mitsuru and Yukari, and this is without doubt the hardest battle of this part. Not only do Yukari and Mitsuru have really strong magic attacks, they also apparently learned some much stronger skills while we were fighting the others. Mitsuru now knows Vorpal Blade, and her ice attacks are hitting much harder than they were when she was on our team. In the first attempt, she goes for Mind Charge and follows it up with a Mabufudine, and it kills both Aigis and Metis. Normally, I'd just give Aigis the Frozen Stone to null Mitsuru's ice attacks, but because Akihiko is technically still part of the team, it's equipped on him, but because I have no way of interacting with him, I can't unequip it from him. Once again, I decide to prioritize taking out Mitsuru first, and when she goes for Mind Charge, I make sure to use a Magic Mirror. But apparently, Mitsuru now knows Megidolon. Yeah, where was that move when she was on my side? And oh wait, Yukari has it too! What? But not only do they both have Megidolon, they also seem to have an unlimited supply of SP, because they are spamming this move every turn, and I mean literally every turn. That is not an exaggeration. Megidolon is the strongest non-exclusive magic attack in the game, and I am just barely able to survive 2 hits, which means I have to heal up at the start of every turn. And because of how few bead chains I have, I eventually have to start using somas. It's pretty much a matter of me barely surviving Megidolons, healing, and having Metis attack for me. Eventually she does take out Mitsuru, but Yukari does not stop spamming Megidolon. I began to wonder if this is some kind of programming quirk, so I looked this up on some forums, and apparently Yukari and Mitsuru are programmed to endlessly spam this move if you use Makarakarn or a Magic Mirror. I can't think of any other boss in the series that is like this, and while I could probably still win, I want to save my somas and bead chains, so I just reset the game and try again. I make some small adjustments and attempt the battle again. My strategy this time is pretty much the same as it was before, just now I don't have to deal with the Megidolon spam, and I make sure to make use of my sutras too. Metis gets taken out a few times, and I make sure to revive her when she does. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to say, it's just another exchange of attacks until one side loses. It's just harder this time with all the power these two have. One thing that's kinda cool though is that Orpheus still has dodge wind from the very beginning of the game, and it's actually helping quite a lot here against Yukari's Megarodon. Who would have thought that a seemingly useless skill I got at the very beginning of the game would be useful in the second to final battle? After a few minutes, I take out Mitsuru, and shortly after, I take out Yukari too, winning me the match and the tournament overall.
Firing!
Fuka gives us her key, and everyone comes back, but apparently Yukari still hasn't given up, but Mitsuru reminds her of how Yukari helped her through something similar. Anyway, Aigis has made her decision, and she decides to use the door to the mall to look into the past to find the truth of how Makoto died. As you'd expect, once we go through that door, we'll face the final boss, but I'm not going to do that just yet. I've pretty much made it a tradition in these videos to take out the Reaper in these runs, so I'm going to do that here as well. Now, for those of you that didn't know, unlike in Persona 4 and 5, where the Reaper is basically an optional super boss, in Persona 3, the Reaper is more of a mechanism to prevent the player from staying on floors for too long, or as punishment for drawing cursed cards in the shuffle time. If you're a first-time player, you may be tempted to challenge him early, but it's really not feasible until the very end of the game. What makes the Reaper so difficult is that, for one thing, he resists everything in the game and has all the heavy skills for every element, plus both high-odds insta-kill skills, all the break skills, and Megidola and Megidolon. Normally, the ideal strategy is to A, use Satan and just spam Black Viper, or B, use Odin to spam Thunder Rain to constantly paralyze him, knock him down with a critical hit, and all-out attack him until he dies. I cannot do either of these things. The best I can do is just keep attacking with my resisted attacks and just chip away at his health. I also have to make sure to keep his attack down with Tarunda, but because of how debuffs work in Persona 3, I can't keep extending the duration like I can in Persona 4 and 5. So every 3 turns, there's going to be 1 turn where he can attack with full attack. The Reaper isn't actually too bad, at least at first. Even though he resists all elements, my attacks are still doing more than I expected them to. On top of that, his AI is also pretty dumb. He often goes for attacks on my party members that they null, and goes for the break skills more often than he needs to, which aren't even that good anyway because they only affect 1 party member and only last 3 turns. Though, for some reason, whenever he uses a move that kills 1 or more of my party members, he seems to always go for it in a series of 2 or 3 turns. There's one part where he takes out a couple of my party members with Mahama on, and then follows that up with a Megidolon twice in a row, and then later another Mahama on, which takes about 3 or 4 turns in total to recover from. Surprisingly, I'm actually able to get a decent amount of critical hits, usually with Aigis, and when this happens, it's pretty much required that I go for an all-out attack, because that does much more damage than I'm able to with any of my normal attacks. There's also a few times where Akihiko shocks him with Zeodyne, which makes him vulnerable to critical hits, and when this happens, it's basically the same deal. Like I said before, he has a lot of strong magic attacks, and when he goes for them, it's almost enough to kill my party, so I have to make sure to heal using whatever beads and somas that I have to heal up just to be safe. Despite the difficulty of this fight, that's about all there is to say. It's just keep chipping away at his health while debuffing and healing, and hoping that he doesn't hit you with a Megidolon or an insta-kill move. This fight goes on for a long time, and might just be the longest one in the game. The whole battle lasts about 20 minutes, and when he gets critically low on health, I try to finish him off, but I fail, and he goes for life drain, giving him some HP back. Which is annoying, but a few turns later, Metis knocks him down with a lucky critical Brave Blade, and I finish him off with an all-out attack. And my reward for beating him is absolutely nothing. But now that the Reaper is dead, it's time to fight the final boss. I make a few last-minute preparations, and then enter the door. I don't know if I've said this before, but as much as I prefer portable, man is it good to see these FMV anime cutscenes again.
So this is the miracle he performed. A shadow. So many. All those peoples.
As I thought, the seal's real purpose, it wasn't to hold back Nyx. It was a seal so that it couldn't be touched.
What do you mean? That monster isn't a shadow. It's the accumulated malice that came from the hearts of countless living people. All of them, deep down, are calling Nyx.
That can't be.
Last December, I too wished to learn death. It's probably true that people in town are wishing to touch it somewhere in their hearts. There is only one thing that differentiates life from stillness. It's that we die. That's all there is.
I think I understand. When your life loses its meaning, the fact of death can be kind of comforting. That lurking malice we're unaware of is strong enough to give birth to such a huge monster. And maybe that's just how it is these days.
What's it doing?
It wants my sister! She has the same power as the one who created the seal!
Don't worry. This thing can't stop us. To go on living is to not give in to your own weakness. Let's win this for a new beginning tomorrow.
There it is, the final boss, Erebus. And I just want to say that this boss is awesome. The atmosphere combined with the music and design of this boss really make this one of the more memorable bosses in the series. Maybe not as much as Nyx or Lucifer from Nocturne, but it's pretty up there. Anyway, the party I decide to bring is Yukari, Metis, and Akihiko. Metis and Aki for attacking, and Yukari for healing. All my party members have their best equipment, and they all have accessories that null their weaknesses, except for Metis because she has no weakness. The best way to describe this boss, gameplay-wise, would be like Nyx, but without the constant form and affinity changing. Throughout the majority of this battle, Erebus resists all magic in the game. Even though these resistances technically aren't considered resistances, the damage reduction still applies. The AI, however, does not know this, so they still go for their magic attacks anyway. I say through most of the fight because he does have a move that changes this, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, Erebus has all multi-target heavy magic attacks, as well as all the severe magic attacks, all break skills, all amp skills, mind charge, power charge, a variety of strong physical moves, and an exclusive move just called Almighty Attack. This sounds like a load to deal with, but none of these moves actually do a terrible amount of damage. Even Almighty Attack doesn't do that much. Basically, my strategy for this fight is similar to the one I used for the Reaper. Keep its attack and defense down with Aegis while assigning him to my allies and letting them attack with whatever they can, while having Yukari as my main healer. Metis is also the one doing the most damage, with her having Brave Blade, the strongest skill in my party, and Akihiko is mainly just punching, although he does miss a few times. I don't know how you miss a 50-foot tall Siamese twin bull human thing in front of you though, but whatever. A few turns in, Erebus goes for Dark Embrace. This is the move I mentioned earlier that changes his properties. This is basically one of those charge moves that you can interrupt by doing a certain amount of damage to him, and while he's charging for it, he loses his magic resistance. I'm not exactly sure how much damage he needs to take for this attack to be prevented, but it seems to take several turns, so it's definitely easy to mess up, especially with him going for ailment moves like Evil Smile, and debuff moves like Masukunda when you do it. Honestly, whether or not you prevent this attack is mostly just a matter of luck, but I am able to prevent it the first time around, and doing this gives me a free turn. This happens a second time, and despite him debuffing my evasion with Masukunda, I'm able to get lucky enough to do enough damage to prevent it, and I'm rewarded with another free attack. At this point, I'm starting to get low on resources, and he does go for this move a third time, and this time he not only goes for Masukunda, but also Matarunda, lowering my attack. I try my best, but this time around I am not able to stop this attack, but thankfully it does nowhere near as much as I was afraid it would, and the only of my party members that goes down is Yukari, who I quickly revive. Apparently this move also gets stronger with each use, but at this point he's already very low on HP. Not long after this happens, he goes into his low health animation, and I also start to notice that Yukari is running low on SP. I try to heal with Oracle for good measures, but this isn't necessary, and it only heals my HP anyway. Overall, I wouldn't say Erebus is hard, he's just tanky. I pretty much used the same strategy for most of the fight, and it worked. And while a few of my allies did go down, I'd never say I felt like I was in danger like I did with the Reaper, and this whole battle lasted just over 15 minutes. In a last-ditch move, he goes for Thunder Rain on Yukari, which she nulls, and after a shot from Aegis, a Brave Blade from Metis, and a punch from Akihiko, Erebus is no more.
Ha! How do you like them apples? We already saved the world once. This was just our encore.
Aegis, let's use that key and go back to our time. I'm ready to start the morning of April 1st.
Of course.
Congratulations, sister.
We unlock the door using our key, and everyone winds up in the Velvet Room. And here, we find out that Metis is the other Aegis. When Makoto died, Aegis wished to become a machine again, which is how Metis was born. Metis is the part of her that she wished away, but after that, something happens.
Good evening. It is now April 1st. Here's a recap of the news from the 31st.
We all wake up, time returns to normal, but Aegis isn't looking so good.
There was some sort of massive system overload that took her way over capacity. It's probably related to her new ability to use multiple personas.
Jeez, you took so long to wake up.
But how? Her synaptic circuit shouldn't even be receiving. She's really
But of course she wakes up, and right before being sent to the lab, she asks Mitsuru if she can keep going to school, and then Yukari asks Aigis to be her roommate. To some people, this may have come out of nowhere, but hey, I'd do anything to have a roommate that doesn't eat all my food in the middle of the night.
I mean, you need one, right? But hey, no need to be so formal. We are friends, aren't we?
Yeah, you're right.
After that, the credits roll, and there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. It is possible to beat Persona 3 FES The Answer with only Orpheus. I get a lot of comments to this day on my old videos saying that the Orpheus only run for portable wasn't that much of a challenge and wanted me to go back to FES. While I don't think it was necessary to play through the journey again, The Answer was a perfect way to revisit this game while providing a familiar yet fresh experience. It itself was also a challenge to just, get used to the mechanics of FES after playing portable. And I know a lot of people don't like The Answer, but I still quite enjoyed it, and I'm glad I finally got a chance to play it after all these years. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Persona 3 is a masterpiece, and while The Answer may not be as good as the main game, it is still a must-play for any Persona 3 fan. As always, be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. If you want to support me financially, consider leaving a Ko-Fi donation of just $3. Until the next video, I will see you guys later.
Tonight